Kim, and this is my time-lapse video for how to complete this drawing of a barn owl in colored pencil. The pencils used on this project were Faber Castell Polychromos, and the paper used was Stonehenge Paper in the shade Natural. If you'd like to know what colors I used for this project, I listed all the colors that I could remember in the description below.
So I started the process for this drawing by loosely blocking in colors for my background. My goal here was to have a very blurry and out of focus background, so the process involved a lot of overlapping colors and make sure I was drawing in very small circles so that the color would blend out nicely. However, the really nice thing about working on Stonehenge paper, which is what I'm using here, is that it's so soft and almost sponge-like that the color blends out great on it, especially when you're using paint thinner. So apparently I'm missing a little chunk of footage. I had a bit of trouble with my camera overheating while I was filming this video, which wasn't overly surprising since I am absolutely terrible with technology. The background for this piece was so busy and needed so many layers that it honestly probably took me longer to complete than the entire owl. At least with the owl, I could let the paper show through in certain places because the tint of the paper was fairly similar to the color of the owl. But for the background, I really wanted smooth, full coverage, so lots and lots of layers it was. So at this point, I would probably say I have about 3 to 4 layers minimum covering most of the background, and I will add quite a few more after I go over the entire thing with paint thinner. If you don't get enough layers down before you go over with the paint thinner, then you just get a greeny gritty look that kind of looks like crayon, and that's not really what I was going for in my smooth, blurry background. Now I am going over with the paint thinner to blend everything together, and because, like I said before, the Stonehenge paper is so smooth, this blended everything out so nicely. I have tried this before on Bristol Vellum and the Strathmore Pure Tints paper, I think it's called, and it didn't work anywhere near as good as it did on Strathmore paper. It's not the best detail paper, but it is very good for blending. Alright, so now we have started the eye, and I'm very sorry for the horrible quality right now. It gets better after I zoom my camera out a little bit. Turns out I have a camera that can zoom in very far, but it zooms in really close but doesn't focus, which I guess kind of defeats the purpose. But anyways, I promise it gets a little bit better. I started off the owl's face by just very roughly blocking in where the color around the eye and the shadows in the eye and the shadows of the feathers were, because there's so much detail in the owl's face that it's really easy to get lost. So I found just blocking in where my lights and darks went to start off was an excellent starting point. You'll also notice that I am using a light blue color, which is obviously not an actual color of owl feathers. However, adding the light blue underneath the browns and the warm grays that I'm going to layer over top gives a nice cool tint to the owl's feathers, which is the effect that I was going for. I use this, I think it's called sky blue color, in just about every piece I do. It is just so useful. Again, I'm just very slowly building up my layers to get the shadows where I want them and the lights where I want them, and I'm also making sure that I take the time and look at my reference photos to make sure that the shadows in his feathers are in the right place, especially around his beak. I feel like the anatomy of his face just wouldn't look quite right if I didn't have the shadows and the highlights in the right spot. I'm also really making sure that I pay attention to what direction the feathers are going in the reference photo, especially to the left of his face where I'm working right now. The feathers kind of go in a direction that what isn't really natural in my mind, and that I don't think is where I would have drawn them going if I hadn't been looking at my reference photos. So reference photos are very important. Just blending things out with paint thinner again. Now the next thing I'm going to do is take a mixture of brush and pencil, touch up texture, and titanium white to add highlights on the owl's face. Now this has got to be one of the best products I've ever bought to use with my colored pencil. It takes away all the stress of making mistakes, not being able to cover them up, and not getting bright enough highlights. I literally can't recommend these products enough. It made my life so much easier while I was working on this project, especially since I was working on tinted paper that wasn't white to begin with. It was so useful for getting my bright whites. The only downside that I would say this product has is that it definitely has a different texture and almost feels a little bit gritty when you put it on your paper, so you have to work a little bit harder to get the touch-up texture and titanium white to blend in with the rest of your drawing, but it isn't that difficult and is definitely worth the trouble. Now that I've moved on to the feathers on his body, what I found to be really helpful was to block in my dark areas first. There were just so many feathers and very subtle variations between all of them. I found my eyes getting very, very lost in my reference photo. So by blocking in where the dark shadows were on his feathers first, it really helped me figure out where I was. Just darkening up some of the areas underneath those feathers to make them pop more against the rest of his face, and darkening the shadows along the side of his beak to really emphasize the shape of his beak and makes his eye pop out a little bit more. Contrast is a wonderful thing. Now you might notice the shadow on the left side of the owl looks a little bluey green. That is not how it looks in my reference photo. I just really wanted the owl to look like it belonged with the rest of the photo, so I used some of the colors that I used in the background in the shadows on the owl, so he doesn't look like he was cut and pasted into the background. He looks like he actually belongs in the forest he has been situated in. Now, using this cream color might seem kind of pointless because it's basically the same color as my paper, but it really helped the really soft feathers of his body blend in with each other, and really helped when I was applying paint thinner over top to get smooth blending, but also still keep the really light color saturation that I had. I didn't want really dark brown feathers. I wanted everything to be very soft and subtle. So by layering the cream color over top, it blended out nicely without anything being too dark or too harsh. Going back over with paint thinner again, please notice how many layers I lay down before I go over with the paint thinner. That is very important. If you don't lay down enough layers, it still just kind of looks like crayon. It's 100% fixable if you do that. You just gotta layer more layers on top, and paint thinner doesn't damage your paper, so it's great. One tip I have, if you're using paint thinner and the titanium white and touch-up texture mixture together, is make sure you wait until the paint thinner completely dries before you add the touch-up texture and titanium white on top. That might seem self-explanatory, but I didn't a couple of times, and it basically made my titanium white mixture completely disappear. While working on the Stonehenge paper, you really have to make sure that your pencils are sharp. Even when you're just blocking in color and not adding any detail on top, you still need to make sure your pencils are sharp. I didn't for my first couple of layers, especially in the background, because I was just being really lazy, and I really wasn't happy with the look. This paper is so soft and spongy that it doesn't take detail well, and almost like naturally looks kind of gritty, so having a sharp pencil, very important. Alright, now I'm just going over with paint thinner again and adding my final details. Thank you so much for putting up with my super awkward, probably super rough voiceover. Maybe one day I'll get better at this public speaking thing, but it'll probably take a little while, so it'll be fun.
Thanks so much for watching. If you're interested in purchasing this piece of art, it'll be available in my Etsy shop, which will be linked down below in the description. Please like and subscribe for more art time-lapse videos and art tips and tricks. I post a new video every Thursday, so I will see you next week.